Our next speaker this morning is A.Thomas. And Andrew is a biodiversity officer for Waikato Regional Council. And in a past life, he was a professional falconer. I don't know what that has to do with his topic, but community groups, potentially scalpels or effective weapons in the environment. And we're going to hear about Andrew's passion for working with community groups and large-scale biosecurity operations. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I just thought I wanted to get it out there. Not many professional falconers around, and I had the lucky opportunity to be one for nearly 7 years. So, bit of a plug for Wingspan in Rotorua, awesome place. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko United Kingdom te whakapapa aranga mai enari, ko Kuranui te whenua tupu, ko tiro te kāinga no Kuranui ahau, kei tiro ahau e noho ana. He apiha re ringa rauropi ahau e te kaunihira a rohi o Waikato, ko A.Thomas ahau. Tēnā tātou katoa. So good morning, everyone. My family are from the UK, and I'm a first-generation New Zealander. And I grew up in Morrinsville. I now live in the mighty South Waikato in the corrugated iron town of Tiro, and I work for Waikato Regional Council as a senior biodiversity officer. One of my core responsibilities is to support community groups working in this space and also in biodiversity restoration and across the region. So today I'm going to provide some thoughts on how we might be able to work better with our community groups in the biosecurity space. And the title of my talk is, as you can see on the slide, is Biosecurity Delivered by the Community in the Community. So many biodiversity projects are inherently biosecurity focused, as without effective biosecurity, they're unlikely to achieve outcomes on the ground for our biodiversity. So as this is a biosecurity-focused conference, I did want to start with just a very brief definition of what biodiversity is. So we've got AI to help me here with this generation of a great image, which captures the essence of New Zealand's biodiversity. I thought it was quite interesting. See if you can spot anything weird in that image, and I will draw your attention to it in a moment. So it's a test for you guys today. But in essence, it's the diversity of life on Earth. It includes genetic variability, it includes species diversity, ecosystem diversity, and phylogenetic diversity. And for those of you who didn't notice it, there's a double-headed eel in the image, which somebody had to point out to me, and I went, oh yeah, now you've seen it, you can't unsee it. It's one of those situations, right? Okay. But some of these species you might have been lucky enough to see in your travels around New Zealand. But there is a huge diversity of life in New Zealand, and I'm going to talk a bit about those shortly. But community groups are generally doing biosecurity work to protect species that are important to them in areas that are also important to them within their part of the region. So the first slide is not so much an opportunity, but more of a context-setting slide. And I thought it was important to set the scene because to understand that the community groups are also facing the same challenges that we are, but even maybe in more of a pressure cooker state. So as with our own biosecurity programs, community groups are also under increasing pressure to deliver more with less money. Two of the major funders, DOC and the lotteries, are under extreme competition for their funding. DOC's last community funding round was 15 times oversubscribed. And as a result of this, other funders, such as regional councils, district councils, philanthropists, businesses, are under increasing pressure for their own funds. Jobs for Nature projects, which came about as a result of funding through COVID, were focused on employment, so they were heavy in the labour components. In order to maintain the viability of these projects long term and for them to continue, they've had to completely pivot and shift and move to a model which is low labour to attract other funders and maintain some of the gains which have been achieved through the previous 3 years. And while Jobs for Nature provided a much needed funding boost for some of our long-standing groups, it was only a short-term reprieve to the otherwise challenging financial position that many of these groups are facing. It also increased the number of projects now competing for that reduced funding pool. Community groups also have funding does impact on their direction as well. And the reason that I wanted to point this out was that community groups have been so effective with some of the species recovery programs that those species which they have been protecting in some cases have been downgraded in their threat classification. A few species, some may argue over how much role the community have had in this space, but species like North Island brown kiwi, North Island kokako, Northern New Zealand dotterel have had significant support from the community over the years, and as a result of that and others involved in this space, their threat classification has been downgraded. Now you might be asking, why does that matter? Well, as species become less threatened, they are less likely to be eligible for funding from the Department of Conservation, and as a result, these groups have had to shift their focus, think about what other species they can be looking to protect that is within their area. You can't just simply pick up and move your project somewhere else and start operating differently. So these projects have had to focus on species like Australasian bittern, maybe not a bad thing, this is a species which needs a lot of our help, but also species like long-tailed bats, as these are still critically threatened status. So next, monitoring and surveillance is another key point for these opportunity with these community groups. And there are many eyes and many ears out there as part of that. So there's a lot that can be captured. And I think that in the biosecurity space, this monitoring and surveillance is probably under-recognised, and I think that we want to promote it a bit more. Understanding how we engage with the community in the biosecurity space is an interesting question. With so many possible emerging threats for New Zealand's economy and our environment, choosing the ones that we socialise with the community are very important. Understanding the alignment with existing projects and what's a focus for them may not necessarily be a focus for us, but just looking at that alignment between our program of work and what those community groups are focusing on is really important. Investing effort with the groups that are already willing to be involved is likely to deliver the best return on investment for our programs. Many community groups are already actively involved in the use of some of these apps, and we've seen iNaturalist come up quite a few times. So Seek by iNaturalist is used widely. There's around 3 million observations in New Zealand already using that app, but other apps include eBird, Merlin Bird ID, and as I've shown on this slide, Find a Pest down in the bottom right-hand corner is sort of relatively new in this space, but it's great to hear where these apps are actually integrating with iNaturalist. I think there's absolutely, that's the way to go, integration with existing. There are so many different apps available to identify species using mobile phones, and getting the community groups using these apps effectively is even more important than developing the app itself. Replication is a real risk in this space. We know time and time again, many apps have been created, but not so many have actually stood the test of time. So it's really important to think about this. It might seem obvious to say, but it would be interesting to compare the investment of time and effort put into developing these apps compared to the amount invested in the implementation phase. I would hazard a guess to suggest that investment is heavily weighted in the development space and less so in the implementation. And one of the ways our council uses iNaturalist, as others have suggested earlier in this conference, to use that iNaturalist for an alert process for a species in the RPMP. Another area is education and advocacy. So what role can the community play in education and advocacy for biosecurity? Are there opportunities to engage with people who are already well trusted in the community? And I use that word very carefully, trust. It's very important. And these community groups that are operating in the community have that inherent trust. We have one such example where a retired local vet has a well-established trust in the rural community in which they live. They have become a staunch advocate for biodiversity restoration in their local area, and for that reason have been very successful in establishing many restoration projects and even changing the attitude and the focus of their local district council in the work that they do within their local reserves, going from reserve management plans which have looked at focusing on recreational aspects to moving into that biodiversity restoration and really considering what was historically there. So it's a really big shift for that district council, and it's great to see the community is driving this. So our council have also been involved in educational workshops, and I know that some of you have mentioned those as well. We ran biocontrol workshops, and these were really successful. They came from the community requesting that from us, and we actually ran other workshops with that same theme in other places because the first ones went so well, and we'd be more than happy to share our slides with others if they wanted to get that going in their region as well. So these workshops empowered the community with knowledge. They've given them an opportunity to engage in the transfer and releases of biocontrol agents in their area and showed real promise and were very successful in that regard. When community groups are empowered with information, they can successfully lead behaviour change in the communities in which they are located. Do you have opportunities to influence the work being done in the community groups, and are there opportunities to engage and empower influencers and trusted community members to lead in this space? So community groups are also far more agile often than local government. They can also trial new products and they can be very innovative in their methodologies. They can adapt to change and also come up with innovation. So can we support them to trial these new products and provide technical input into the innovations which they have come up with? We have to do this in a constructive way or we will shut down those conversations. We want to be open to new innovations, and we need to just give these community groups a chance to actually share their ideas with us. Some of them might not end up as great results. I remember one example where an individual had come up to me and had come up with a glass jar, which was going to be a bait station, and there was some wire in it, and it held the bait in there, and I was sort of thinking, well, I'm just not quite sure that's going to really work. But in other situations where it might be a very simple tool, like the one on the right-hand side here, where a community group have designed an easy-to-view methodology for their DOC 200, DOC 250 traps, where they can drive along an access road, they can quickly see whether the trap has been set off. It saves them a lot of time. They don't have to stop and check those traps. There's also much more complex innovations as well, and the use of AI is one such tool which many groups are starting to use. They can develop new tools that are suitable for their particular situation, and they often have the time to make adaptive changes for the tools to work for them over time, tweaking, perfecting them to work in a more effective way. Some community groups have been harnessing the power of AI for analysing sound recordings for the Australasian bittern, long-tailed bats as well, and increasingly this is being used to monitor trail cam images using image recognition. Some groups have also have developed smart live capture traps, which is showing real promise in certain habitats, particularly for feral cats. So the next section I wanted to focus on was a quick case study from one of our northern Coromandel community groups. So environmental DNA, or eDNA, has been successfully used by Mahakaro Forest Estate, one of our community groups on the Coromandel Peninsula, to identify native frogs in the diet of feral pigs and ferrets. Their project is home to many threatened species, including both the Archies and Hochstetter's frogs, as well as North Island brown kiwi and northern striped gecko. Our native frog species are particularly vulnerable to introduced mammalian predators, as their defence strategies were to protect them from native predators, which hunt by sight and sound. So they evolved to be very well camouflaged. As you can see in this image on the right-hand side, it's probably pretty obvious to see the frog, but it is in the centre of that image. But you can really see just how well camouflaged they are perfectly to a leaf. And this is an Archie's frog there. They also make very minimal calls, unlike our introduced counterparts. These strategies, however, as many of you probably are well aware, are completely ineffective against our introduced mammalian predators, which have an acute sense of smell. So this community group used eDNA to analyse the gut contents from feral pigs and ferrets killed within their project area. The results of this work showed 4 out of 9 pigs tested positive. Tested positive for COVID. No, tested positive for having native frogs in their diet using DNA, and they found Archies and Hotsteaders in the diet. So these frogs, as you could probably imagine, are very hard to find in the diet of an animal. They break down very quickly, but even in a very short space of time, they'll be passed through the gut. So if we're picking up 4 of the 9 pigs, then it's likely that those other pigs just had eaten frogs on another day. Okay, so both species of frogs were also recorded in the diet of ferrets, with 1 ferret having the remains of an Archies and 4 Hotsteaders frogs in its gut at the time it was captured. Now, this is of particular concern in the northern Coromandel because this is an area which has historically not had ferrets, and these are being caught more and more frequently. So it's sort of the invasion front is still moving up into the northern Coromandel for ferrets at least. So this cutting-edge research has provided scientific confirmation of the importance that these 2 pest species pose in the populations of our native frog species. One other site reported even higher numbers of frogs in the diet of a pig. 1 pig killed in the Wharirino forest within the King Country had the identifiable remains of 56 frogs in its gut at one time. So it gives you some idea of just how significant these predators can be. So another area that this community group are working in is wasp control. And the reason for that is they're trying to protect the species down here on the bottom left-hand corner, a beautiful butterfly known as the forest ringlet or Helm's butterfly. This is an endemic butterfly that we know very little about, and our understanding of the threats are largely unknown. We do, however, suspect that introduced wasps are major predators of this butterfly, and particularly at the caterpillar or larval stage, as only areas in which they are in higher altitudes are they holding their own. And in most places, they're quickly disappearing. So this butterfly has a very, very, very slow reproductive rate. And as such, it is particularly vulnerable to the impact of predators. An adult female may lay between 20 to 40 eggs in its lifetime. Compare that to a monarch butterfly of around 1,000 eggs. What about how long does it take for the caterpillar to get to a butterfly? Well, for a monarch, it might be 10 days. For this butterfly, it's 1 to 2 years. So very slow indeed. And during that time, they are susceptible to predation. So this community group used Vespex, many of you will be pretty familiar with that, to control wasps across the 450 hectare operational area. This is within a mixed broadleaf podocarp forest. It's also a cloud forest. It's very, the bait stations were installed at 100-metre spacings on the border and approximately 200-metre spacings within the internal lines. They had a total of 300 bait stations and did 2 fills per season of bait. They used Vespex control for 4 years in a row, and in the 5th year, they didn't need to do control. But there is one caveat here that environmental conditions may have had some impact on the wasp population, which hasn't been assessed here. It wasn't possible to determine what impact, what impact this is having on the butterfly population, as the sample sizes are simply too low. But over the long term, this toxin shows real promise, and so opportunity for other populations, to use this, other community groups to use this toxin to protect this species elsewhere. So in summary, I would like to highlight the following opportunities with community groups in the biosecurity space as I see them. So the key first one is monitoring and surveillance. The community can become powerful allies in the biosecurity space. Are you making the most of the opportunity that community provide for monitoring and surveillance? Do you know, or do the community know what they should be looking out for in your area, and do your priorities align with theirs? Education and advocacy. Are there trusted champions in the community that you can tap into to lead the biosecurity messaging in their community? What opportunities can you take to advocate for biosecurity and biodiversity that aligns with the work community groups are already doing? Are there opportunities for you to support community groups to be innovative and support adaptive management with input and feedback from experts? But I did mention it does need to be delivered in a constructive way so that we can keep this communication open and working together for everyone. Thank you.